The Galactic Confederation's war games were meant to be a proving ground, a test of military prowess among the most advanced civilizations in the known universe. It was a stage for the strong, the cunning, and the technologically superior to showcase their might. For the first time, Earth had been invited to participate, though few took the invitation seriously. To the other species, humans were primitive, barely scraping the surface of interstellar travel. Their military, bound by biology and outdated methods, was seen as laughably inadequate compared to the genetically engineered soldiers, cybernetic warriors, and AI-assisted tacticians of the Confederation's elite forces. The laughter echoed in the war room even before the games began. Tall, reptilian Crothian officers hissed with amusement, their clawed hands tapping against polished armor. The insectoid Varkesh clicked their mandibles in what passed for smug derision. Even the normally reserved Zanari, a species of pale-skinned, telepathic tacticians, exchanged knowing glances. At the center of this derision stood Earth's delegation, a small contingent of military officers who bore the weight of representing their entire planet. They were outnumbered, outclassed, and, by all appearances, outmatched. Scouts, a Crothian commander sneered, his voice a guttural rasp. "That's what you call warriors? They will not last the first day." Admiral Harris, Earth's highest-ranking officer present, kept his face impassive. He had heard it all before. The dismissive tone, the doubt, the sheer arrogance of those who had never seen what a human was capable of when backed into a corner. He simply folded his hands behind his back and watched as the war game details unfolded on the holographic display before them. Torgoth 7 was the selected battleground. A death world by any definition. Its dense, humid jungles were teeming with predators evolved to hunt the most resilient lifeforms. The Confederation had chosen it specifically to simulate high-stakes, survival warfare. The mission was straightforward. Teams had 72 hours to locate and retrieve a hidden beacon while eliminating rival forces. There would be no outside support, no reinforcements, and no second chances. The human team, 10 in number, would be one of the smallest. But that wasn't what drew attention. It was the man standing at the back, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room with an unsettling calmness. Unlike the others, he wore no insignia, no polished medals. His uniform was stripped of unnecessary adornment, the sleeves pushed up to reveal forearms lined with faded scars. Lieutenant Jack Callahan didn't look like much to the untrained eye. He was of average height compared to the towering aliens around him, his build lean but solid, a product of years of training rather than genetic engineering. But those who knew what to look for saw the way he moved. Silent, efficient, coiled like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. He ignored the sneers, the dismissive glances, the whispered comments. He had been in worse situations, facing enemies who didn't just think they were superior, they were. And yet, they had still fallen. He wasn't here to boast, to argue, or to prove a point in words. That would come later, when it mattered. When the simulation began, chaos erupted almost instantly. The other teams, armed with cutting-edge weaponry, deployed in force, scanning the jungle with sophisticated sensors and aerial drones. They moved in coordinated formations, confident in their ability to overpower any opposition through sheer technological dominance. Jack disappeared, while his team moved cautiously through the underbrush, following the standard military procedures drilled into them. He slipped away without a word. His absence went unnoticed at first, drowned out by the cacophony of the jungle and the occasional burst of plasma fire as different factions clashed. But when night fell, whispers of unease spread among the Confederation forces. The first to encounter him were the Crothians. 8 feet tall, armored in natural scales tougher than most body armor, they moved with confidence, their thermal scanners cutting through the dark. They had no reason to expect trouble. Humans were fragile, loud, untrained in real jungle warfare. Then one of them vanished. No sound, no struggle. One moment he was there, the next gone. The others halted, claws tightening around their weapons, eyes sweeping the darkness. Another one fell. Panic set in. Their leader barked orders, but it was too late. Something moved in the shadows, too fast to track. By the time they realized what was happening, only one remained. He backed against a tree, eyes wide, breath coming in ragged gasps. Then, finally, he saw him. Jack Callahan stepped into the dim moonlight, a knife in one hand, blood dripping from its edge. He had taken down some of the most physically powerful warriors in the Confederation, and he had done it with nothing more than patience, precision, and the instincts honed from years of surviving wars that had no rules. The Crothian turned and ran. By morning, the jungle was silent in places it should not have been. Drones sent to track the human team found nothing but remnants, traps sprung, equipment stolen, bodies left as warnings. The commanders watching from the war room began to lean forward, the earlier amusement on their faces replaced with something colder, something thoughtful. Jack Callahan was still out there, and he was hunting. Fear spread through the jungle like a slow-moving fog, thick and suffocating. The first reports had been dismissed as incompetence. An elite Crothian squad wiped out in the night? Impossible. But then another team vanished, this time a unit of Zanari tacticians. Their command center received a final transmission, heavy breathing, muffled gunfire, then silence. No bodies, no gear, no indication of what had happened. Only the knowledge that they were being hunted. The Confederation commanders watching from the war room no longer laughed. Their initial confidence had been replaced with unease, the kind that settled in the gut like poison. They had seen countless war games, but never one where an entire battlefield fell quiet for the wrong reasons. There should have been clashing armies, coordinated attacks, and strategic maneuvers. Instead, they were witnessing an unraveling. Jack Callahan moved through the jungle like a shadow, unseen and unstoppable. He had no interest in direct combat, not when fear itself was a weapon. His first kills had been calculated, methodical. But now he was letting them feel it. The doubt, the paranoia, the raw understanding that their technology didn't matter here. Their armor, their scanners, their energy shields, none of it could protect them from an enemy they couldn't find. A squad of Varkesh hunters, chosen for their tracking skills, had been deployed to flush him out. They moved in near-perfect silence, their chitinous exoskeletons blending seamlessly with the jungle's twisted foliage. Their multifaceted eyes scanned infrared, their antennae picking up vibrations in the air. They were apex predators, honed through centuries of selective breeding. Jack had killed the first one within 10 minutes. A tripwire made from salvaged enemy gear had sent a sharpened jungle stake through its torso. The Varkesh didn't scream. They were trained to suppress such responses, to die without giving away their position. But the others heard the impact, smelled the dark ichor soaking into the earth. One of them clicked its mandibles, signaling for a tactical retreat. They were careful, deliberate, and yet another one fell. This time, Jack didn't use a trap. He dropped from the canopy like a phantom, his knife finding the soft joint between armor plates. He was gone before the others could react. The survivors abandoned all pretense of stealth. The leader let out a sharp, high-pitched sound, a command for their war drones to engage. Metallic sentinels rose into the air, their sensors sweeping for movement. They adjusted for wind, heat, even heartbeats. Jack's heartbeat didn't register. He had coated his skin in a thin layer of jungle mud, thick enough to mask his thermal signature. His breathing was slow, controlled, matching the rustling leaves around him. He watched as the drones hovered, scanning and rescanning the area where he should have been. Then, with a single careful movement, he fired a scavenged pulse grenade directly into their formation. The explosion was small but effective. The drones flickered and dropped, their circuits fried. The Varkesh hunters scattered, their precision shattered. They had been trained to adapt, to analyze, but there was nothing to analyze. Nothing logical about a single human moving through the jungle like death incarnate. Jack picked them off one by one. By the time the last hunter fell, his black eyes staring lifelessly at the canopy above, the jungle had fallen silent again. The war room was silent, too. Officers and commanders from across the Confederation watched the feed with unreadable expressions. The human delegation, seated near the back, said nothing. They didn't need to. The point had been made. A Crothian warlord broke the silence. He's cheating. Admiral Harris raised an eyebrow. Cheating how? He's using unnatural methods. No soldier fights like this. No soldier should be able to evade our forces so easily. You assumed we'd fight your way, Harris said simply. That was your mistake. On the battlefield, Jack was already moving toward the beacon. He knew the Confederation wouldn't send another tracking squad. They were past that now. They would send heavy firepower, mechanized forces, overwhelming numbers. He welcomed the challenge. The jungle trembled as war machines descended upon it. Quadrupedal assault drones, towering exosuit-clad shock troopers, elite enforcers armed with enough firepower to level a city block. This was the response of a force that had realized they were no longer hunting. They were being hunted. Jack took a slow breath, crouched beneath the cover of thick jungle roots. He had spent hours setting the terrain to his advantage. Explosives rigged in natural choke points. Pheromone traps designed to lure the planet's native predators into the enemy's path. Deadfalls and pitfalls disguised beneath thick underbrush. The first wave of machines triggered an explosion that sent molten debris through the ranks behind them. The shock troopers reacted too slowly, their armor protecting them from shrapnel, but not from the shifting jungle floor beneath them. Jack had spent the better part of the day weakening the ground, turning solid pathways into collapsing sinkholes. Then the predators came. Torgoth 7 was home to some of the deadliest creatures in the known galaxy. Their presence had been considered an environmental hazard, something to be avoided. Jack had turned them into allies. The pheromones he had stolen from a fallen Varkesh commander worked perfectly, drawing the jungle's apex predators straight into the enemy's position. The war machines fired indiscriminately, cutting down not just the creatures, but their own men in the chaos. Jack used the distraction to strike. He was inside the exosuit formation before they realized it, moving faster than their targeting systems could compensate for. A plasma bolt skimmed past his shoulder as he plunged his knife into a joint seam, using the weight of the falling soldier to shield himself from incoming fire. Another trooper turned, but Jack was already behind him, yanking a power cell free from the suit's exposed backplate. The Confederation forces were learning, but they were learning too late. Jack reached the beacon as the last echoes of battle faded. He placed a hand against its smooth surface, activating the retrieval protocol. The war game was over. In the war room, silence stretched long and uneasy. The commanders who had once mocked Earth's participation now wore expressions of something dangerously close to respect. The defeated alien general exhaled slowly. If one of your warriors can do this alone. Jack Callahan's voice came through the comms, calm, controlled. Now, imagine what happens when Earth sends an army. The war game was over, but the battlefield still carried the echoes of what had transpired. Smoke coiled through the air, the acrid scent of scorched metal and ozone mixing with the damp, earthy musk of the jungle. The wreckage of mechanized units lay strewn across the landscape, tangled among the remains of alien soldiers and the deep claw marks of the planet's native predators. The beacon pulsed steadily in the clearing, marking the official end of the exercise. But no one watching from the war room spoke. No one moved. Jack Callahan stood beside the beacon, his posture relaxed, but his expression unreadable. He was bloodied, his uniform torn, sweat and dirt streaked across his face. But he was standing and he was alone. The war games had begun with thousands of elite warriors from across the galaxy. He had reduced them to silence. In the observation deck, the alien officers who had once laughed at Earth's participation were now grim, their arrogance stripped away. Some watched the display in stunned disbelief, others in barely concealed unease. A few, the ones who understood war at its most primal level, studied Jack with something closer to respect. A Crothian general, his massive, scaled arms crossed over his chest, exhaled sharply. This was not a victory of strength, he said, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. This was a hunt. The Zanari tactician beside him shook his head, pale fingers steepled. We designed this war game to simulate real battle conditions. The human did not break the rules, nor did he use forbidden technology. He simply adapted. Admiral Harris finally spoke, his voice calm but edged with something undeniable. He did what any of your best warriors would have done if they were capable. He used the terrain, exploited weaknesses, and eliminated threats efficiently. He glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of every commander who had mocked Earth's inclusion. And yet you still believe humans are weak. No one argued. On the battlefield, the retrieval transport descended, kicking up a storm of dust and leaves as it settled in the clearing. The hatch hissed open, and Jack stepped inside without a backward glance. He had no interest in gloating, no need for grandstanding. He had proven his point the only way that mattered. The debriefing took place aboard a Confederation command vessel, where high-ranking officials gathered in a vast chamber lined with holographic displays and tactical readouts. Jack sat at the head of a long metallic table, silent as the discussion unfolded around him. Some of the aliens still bristled, their pride struggling to reconcile the events of the past 72 hours. Others, the ones who had truly understood what had happened, asked the only question that mattered. How many more soldiers like him does Earth have? Harris leaned forward, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. Enough. The room grew even quieter. A Varkesh commander, still nursing a wounded arm from an encounter with one of the planet's native creatures, studied Jack closely. You don't fight like an army. You fight like a predator. Even our best trackers couldn't anticipate your methods. Jack finally spoke, his voice even, unshaken. That's because you assumed I was playing the same game. He leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of his words settle. You fight with strength, with technology, with overwhelming force. It works when your enemy plays by the same rules. I don't. The Zanari tactician tilted his head, his violet eyes narrowing. What do you fight with then? Jack's gaze was steady. Instinct. Experience. The knowledge that there's no such thing as an even battlefield. He let his fingers drum against the table once, a slow, deliberate rhythm. And the understanding that wars aren't won by those who have the most firepower. They're won by those who refuse to lose. The Crothian general exhaled, a low, rumbling growl beneath his breath. We underestimated you. You did, Harris agreed, his expression unreadable. The war game's official results were recorded, the Confederation marking Earth's performance as exceptional but unconventional. It was a careful wording, one that allowed them to acknowledge what had happened without fully conceding the implications. But the implications were already clear. Earth was no longer a curiosity, no longer a minor power to be dismissed with a laugh and a wave of the hand. The Confederation had spent centuries believing themselves the pinnacle of military evolution, refining their warriors through genetic engineering, cybernetic enhancements, and technological superiority. They had built an empire on the assumption that raw power was the ultimate deciding factor in war. Then a single human had stepped into their war games and rewritten the rules. Jack stood as the meeting adjourned, nodding once to Harris before turning to leave. As he passed the gathered officers, a Crothian warrior, the same one who had called Earth's soldiers scouts, watched him with narrowed eyes. There was no laughter now, no mocking grin. Instead, the massive reptilian inclined his head ever so slightly in acknowledgement. Jack didn't return the gesture. He simply walked away, disappearing into the corridors of the ship like a ghost fading into the jungle.